Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yes, no, maybe? I can't see the chat, so unless y'all unmute, I don't think I'll know. Can y'all see the screen? Is my mic not working?
Yeah, we can see the screen, sorry.
Okay. All right, so last week we talked about just how to write a case. Siri here. Oh Let my me know if God, Siri. Okay, anyways. Sorry. So last week we talked about how to write a case and general problems with the case. So today we're gonna just do some drills. Instead of drills, it's just like knowledge you need to know when you're writing a case. So there's this thing when you're writing your case that we call cutting cards. So if anyone doesn't know what a card is, it's basically what we call evidence, right? It's like, oh, can I see that card for your impact? They just mean that, like, can I see the evidence for that? And interestingly, the reason why we call them like cards instead of like why don't you just call it evidence, right? Because way back when there was only like policy debate, they would like have to take their evidence and like like internet was not allowed in debate, and also really it didn't really exist like freely for everyone, right? So what they had to do was they had to like literally print out their evidence and like highlight it and stuff, and then when people asked for it they would like hand it to them on a card. So that's why we call them cards. Interesting. But as for cutting cards, what cutting means is just because like when you have a whole article, right, you can of course, like, let's say you cite one sentence like, oh, 50 million people die because of climate change every year. They would have to go through the entire article just to find that like 50 million, right? Or perhaps you would have to tell them to control F. But when we cut a card, that means that we are taking the specific place in the paragraph, which part you're citing, and then you're like highlighting it so that when people ask for the evidence, they know exactly which part you're talking about in the article. And this is one example of like a cut card. So basically a cut card consists of three things. The first is the tagline, which kind of just like simply explains in like human terms, like in English, what this card is saying, right? Because a lot of times we read like a bunch of complicated articles that no one understands and no one wants to like go through the whole thing to try and understand. So you just have to do like, America is falling behind. Space Force is key to preventing a 21st century Pearl Harbor in space. So there you go. That's the tagline, right? A one sentence statement that just explains what the card says. And then we have our citation, and then this is the text. So I talked about that was right, the tagline, a short description or one sentence about what the card describes. And then the second part is a citation. It can be full or partial. Like you don't have to do it in MLA format. It can be any format you want, really. You could like make up your own format. Like what I used to do was I literally typed it out. I would like type out the author's name, then put the date, name of the article, and then I would just paste the URL, which obviously like is not how MLA or like any actual citation works. But you can just cite it however you want as long as you have the author name, the date, and the URL. Like that's the least amount you need. And let's say like you can't find the author name, because sometimes there's like websites like, I don't know, maybe you got it off of New York Times and there's no author name, right? You can still cite like New York Times, but you just need like a source, and then the date, at least the year that it was published, and then the URL. So we can see here though that you know you can see the full citation, but you know what you really would need is Brian Bender 2018 and then the link. That's like the bare minimum. And then the last part of the card is the text, right? Generally we want so let's say you're citing one specific sentence. You don't want to just like copy and paste that sentence and say like, oh, that's the part I cited. You want to allow the opponents to actually read like at least the full paragraph where you got the evidence from. And also, we generally want to take in the paragraph before and after that paragraph that we got stuff from. So if we see here, right, like technically all of this in the bottom is like unnecessary because we don't cite any of it, right? And we don't cite any of this. So technically, whoever cut this card could have just like only had the highlighted parts and deleted everything. Oh, and deleted everything that was not green, right? But what the reason why we cut cards is not only like so it's faster for our opponents to access our evidence, but also so your opponents can like make sure you're being accountable, right? Because a lot of people just like fib their evidence. They're just like, yeah, it says this when like it doesn't say that, or like it's taken out of context, right? Maybe the article is like, oh, price controls are good, but you take like the specific only one sentence that says price controls could be bad, right? And then you just like extrapolate it. But when you have more context and you have the whole entire paragraph uh before and after, that's when you have a good cut card. And for cut cards, we generally want to bold the tagline. And then for the way that you cut a card is basically like, let's say my argument here is that like there will be another space Pearl Harbor, right, as here. Then I would just highlight if the U.S. is to avoid a space Pearl Harbor, it needs to take seriously the possibility of an attack on the U.S. space system. So when we cut a card, we want to cut it so that you can read directly off the evidence and it sounds like an actual sentence. So you can't like, cut pouring billions more dollars into hardening its defenses. Like that's not really a sentence that makes sense, right? So when you see this person cutting, Russia and China are years ahead in developing the means to destroy or disable satellites the US military depends on, from anything from gathering intelligence to guiding precision bombs, missiles, and drones. So when you read that, it sounds like, a full sentence. And right here, right, where they have the brackets, they inserted one word just to flow, like make sure it flows like a sentence, right? We are now a point where Star Wars is not just a movie, right? So that's why they added at to make it flow well. So we are now at a point where Star Wars is not just a movie. So in general, you want to minimize everything that's not part of your argument, like you're obviously not reading that and you're not citing it. So these are all like small and nobody wants to read that. What they do care about is what you are actually getting your evidence from, right? The sentences. So that's why you're going to highlight, bold, and underline that part. And it's also going to be in a bigger font. Now some people are really particular about like what color they want. Like they're like, oh, blue is so much better than green, or like yellow is superior, right? Like it doesn't really matter, but you do want to keep your like colors consistent, right? Like you shouldn't be doing the rainbow of colors for every different card. Like, oh, this one's red and that one's yellow, and like everyone's gonna be confused. So it's better to just stick to one color. And also highlight the author's last name and then the last 2 digits of the year, so 18. Okay, so does anyone have questions on like how to cut a card or like?
Didn't they change approaching to at? Like, isn't that kind of changing the meaning of the sentence?
I mean, yeah, but it's like not that egregious, right? Like people do this all the time in debate, right? Like you fib a little bit, like maybe it says, "Oh, it is like sometimes it says something like, for example, like the US might go to war with China." And the people take out the might. They're like the US go to war with China, or like they insert a will, right? And that's fine, especially because in the like evidence they it's not like they deleted the word approaching. So yeah, you could argue against them by saying, "Oh, we're approaching a point." But in reality, like, that doesn't really give you a strong argument. Like, "Oh, they're approaching it. We're not at it yet." Well, you're like conceding that they will get to that point in the future. So that's usually not a problem. I mean, you can point it out if you want to, but it's kind of useless. Any other questions? Okay. So now I'll live cut a card. Let's see. Okay, we're on the price controls topic. So price controls would decrease innovation, right? And then let's say we're right here. So as Congress, I'm just reading this. Okay, the report shows that reducing drug revenues will lead to price cut of 40 to 45%, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the whole paragraph and then one paragraph after it, controlling it. And then I'm pasting it here. Okay. And then I'm going to take the citation. Oh. And I have like a thing that automatically cites for me. Sometimes it's a little bit inaccurate. So we can see that it's in Tia Radu, and this one says 52, which is obviously wrong. That's not the author's name, but it's easy to just change that. So the part that I want is price controls would drastically decrease innovation, right? That's my tagline. Price controls would decrease innovation. So I'm gonna bold that. And then the part that I specifically want is this part. So this is the only sentence that I want. So I'm going to highlight it as well after I've bolded and underlined. So wow, that's really ugly, but whatever. And then so here's something that makes it easier. If you click this, it's like a paint format. If you click it once, basically it copies this formatting, and then whatever you highlight, it pastes it onto there, right? And that does it for the next one. But if you double click it, it stays until you turn it off. So I highlight this, and I can highlight that, and then it stays, right? But I just need to highlight that for now. And then, of course, we want to make everything else very small. So there you go. I have my whole card, right? That was super easy. That's just the tagline, citation, and then the part that you actually want. Does anyone have any questions about this?
If you don't really have like that side thing where it shows you like what like how to like cite it essentially, like it, then isn't it like more trouble than it's worth, because you only like use a sentence, right?
Yeah, but like in the debate world, right, it's like common courtesy to do this because it's like imagine if you had a bunch of links, right? Like let's say you had a case and instead of like cutting the cards, you just had hyperlinks. So when they call for the evidence, you have to try and remember. And a lot of times we read like 100-page PDFs or like 20-page PDFs, right? You have to remember exactly which part you're talking about. And although sometimes we only have a sentence, sometimes it's more than that, right? Sometimes it's like this, where you have um, you take your argument from multiple different sentences. At that point, if you don't cut the card, you just give them the link. Oh yeah, you're like Control F Russia and China, and then Control F Star Wars, and then Control F like Space Pearl Harbor. It's kind of awkward, and it's a waste of everyone's time. So this is why we want to cut our cards. But does anyone have questions about like the process of cutting cards?
Is there a link to that website, and like, can you give it?
This website, I'll send it later, but so there's no questions about how to do this, right? Okay. Then you're going to cut your own card. Oh my god. This lag. Oh my god, the lag. Okay. So y'all are going to go to this site, and it's pretty long, but you don't have to read the whole thing. You just need to find one thing that could be useful for one of your cases, or just useful in general. And then you're going to cut a card in either a Google Docs or a Word doc, and then you're going to screenshot that card in the channel. So you're just going to like snip the screen, right? You're just going to like screenshot like that and then paste it in the channel. So I'm just going to paste that link in the chat. Oh, oops. Give me a sec. Okay, so this is so just cut one card. It shouldn't take you too long, so I'll give you guys 5 minutes to finish that, and then yeah, when you're done, please put a picture of your cut card in the chat. All right, friends, it's been 5 minutes. Can I see screenshots of those beautiful cards in the chat, please? Is anyone like confused or don't know how to do it?
I just don't have enough time, I guess.
You don't have to read through the whole thing. It's just like find one sentence. So like you saw how I did it, right? I feel like.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So don't feel like you need to read through the whole thing. Like just read until you think like, oh, that's one interesting thing that I could use. And then once you find one sentence that you could potentially use, just cut that card. So I'll just give you guys 3 more minutes to do that. Okay. So don't read through the whole thing. Just read until you find something useful and then cut the card and paste it in the chat. So here, I'll share my screen again so y'all can remember what it looks like. All right, so now it has been another 3 minutes. So are we done cutting the cards?
Almost. I just need to put on the header thingamabobber and like, well, also I have to put the cited source thing in there.
Okay. Just wait for another minute. Daniel, how's it going for you? Is Daniel here today? I guess not. All right, are we ready now? Juliana, did you finish?
I'm looking for the author.
It's okay if you can't find the author, just like the website title or like the publishing source is okay.
Okay. So after the author name, it's the title, or is it the, no, it's the, isn't it the qualifications, right? But like this thing doesn't have an author, so I guess I'll just qualifications. And then
No, you only
afterwards,
need author, date, and the URL. So you don't
oh,
have to do the other stuff right now.
oh, okay. I see. Okay, I think I have it now.
Okay. Can you take a screenshot of that? Okay, great. Let's look at this. Competition will resolve the problem of high costs and would increase research and innovation, and price controls will not be able to do this. That's great. So we have a good tagline. We have this, the year, and then that. Perfect. More competition, not price controls, will resolve the benefit of competition.
Wait, whoops.
Oh, so I think you meant to highlight that
Yeah.
part. Is that more research and innovation, which would be hampered with price controls. Great. I think the only feedback I have is like you should highlight the author and then the 16 as well. Yeah, and other than that, it looks fine. So. Oh, and when you cut your cards, we want to put 2016 instead of 16, but when you highlight it, you want to highlight only the 16. But yes, so for everyone here, next week's homework is to write another contention on AF or neg, whichever side you didn't do last time. Or if you did both sides, write just one more contention on either side, and then cut the cards for all your cases. Okay. And here's casing drill number 2. So this is going to be about labeling cards. So once again, in case anyone forgets, I've said this like 3,000 times, but there's 3 parts to a case, right? Uniqueness, which is why only your side solves for the problem. So Juliana, your card was a great example of uniqueness, right? So why does competition is the only people who solve for like innovation costs instead of price controls, right? So your argument was really good for this topic, basically that price controls cannot solve the problem of innovation, right? And it basically says only the neg without price controls can do innovation. And then so other than that, uniqueness is also what is the problem right now or explaining the problem. So you also have to prove that a problem exists or a problem doesn't exist if you're on neg or af, right? So when you're on neg, you're defending the status quo. So generally you're trying to say that like everything is dandy in the status quo. You can say like, oh, 100 new drugs are being invented every year. That would be the uniqueness for neg, right? And then once we implement price controls, which decrease innovation, obviously that number of new drugs every year is going to go down. And then on the AF, you're trying to say there's a problem with the status quo. So the uniqueness on AF could be something like 57 million Americans can't afford prescription drugs, right? So that would be the problem right now. The second part to a case is the link, which is basically the connections between arguments and anything connecting the resolution all the way to your impact, right? Or your uniqueness to your impact. So let's say after you describe the problem, you're like, yeah, my first link is price controls would decrease innovation because they decrease profits. And when profits are decreased, there's less money to be spent on innovation, which is why the impact is there's less new drugs. So the link is basically from price controls means less profit, which means less innovation. And then finally, I'm sure everyone knows what this is, but we have the impact, which is like, so what of your argument? What's the impact? As for neg, we talked about innovation going down, and then app would probably be something like millions can't afford drugs. So is anyone confused about uniqueness, link, impact?
What would the evidence be counted as? Would it be counted as like warrant or something?
Sorry, what did you say?
What would evidence be counted as? Like in like all this stuff, like uniqueness.
No, evidence, like your cards, right? They're the ones that provide the uniqueness, the link, and the impact, right? You can't just like claim that like, oh, price controls will drive down innovation without like any evidence, right? Or like innovation saves lives, right? Like no one's gonna believe you, especially if your opponents have evidence. So there's uniqueness evidence, there's link evidence, and there's impact evidence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're right. But like the thing is, like, so essentially, is every single sentence other than like, yeah, essentially every sentence is supposed to be just pulled out from articles.
Yeah, so basically, that's usually what happens, but sometimes we want to have like, words explaining, because like sometimes you might quote like a specific argument, right? You might be like, oh, according to the Washington Post in 2020, a nuclear space a space Pearl Harbor will happen again if we don't create a space force, right? And like that's kind of confusing. Or like, miscalculation increases for every degree of uncertainty, right? So that's kind of confusing. So generally, after we like cite an evidence, we kind of sum it up in our own words, right? So like in other words, this means that every increase in blah blah leads to blah blah blah. So when you look at cases, like it's also very very hard to understand a case when you're just listening to them list one like evidence after another, right? So Leonard says this, and then the ICGC says this, and then BMW says this. I don't know, right? Like, if you just keep listing cards, it's generally kind of hard. So that's why, right? Like, if you look at the case I used in freshman year, this is like none of this is cited, right? Like generic information, you don't need a cite, right? Like when I say mergers or when companies buy other companies, like I don't have to cite an evidence for that because like no one's gonna tell me like, oh, you're wrong. That's not what a merger is, right? Then they'll just look like kind of not so smart. So, um, like we want to have some background information, and then I go into like according to blah 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 blah, and then I kind of like explain with my own words. I cite a card, right? And then you see me using quotations here. And then I explain it in my own words so people don't get confused. So it's not just always one card after another. You also have to insert your own like rhetoric in there.
So essentially, you repeat everything twice.
Not exactly like the your own words is only if the evidence is confusing, right? Like if you look when I read two, like this is not in 2016, $2 trillion was spent on mergers by generic companies alone. Like I didn't re-explain it, right? And then I went on to a second card. But generally when like something is confusing, like right here I cite generic companies fund their acquisitions with debt, rates and drug prices go up following a merger. Right? So it's not inherently clear how this is related back to the topic. So then I have to explain it right here. Why do price controls solve these acquisitions?
So it's kind of like a link.
You like sure, you can say that. I think it's a little bit more like warranting, right? Like generally when you say stuff in your own words, it's more like warranting or re-explaining in like layman's terms. But we don't want to have like just card after card after card. It's like really hard to listen to. Okay. And you don't like have to label. No one's gonna be like, oh, can I see the evidence on the part that you just like read your like you don't have evidence, right? So no one's gonna like call for it or anything. But that's not even the important part. So as long as we understand uniqueness, link, and impact, we're gonna just start doing our next drill. And that one's gonna take a while. So are there any questions about what uniqueness, link, and impact are? Okay, I'll take that. Everyone understands. So the next drill that we're gonna do is basically I'm gonna have a PDF and there's a lot of evidence in there. They're all cut cards. and they have the tagline, they have the citation, and they have the text. So what y'all are going to need to do is you're going to need to label the cards as either uniqueness, a link, or an impact card, right? So for example, if my argument was like if I'm on AF on this topic that we should implement price controls on the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm AF, I would say, like, for example, if there's 3 different cards, the first card is like price controls would make drugs more affordable. That would be like my link. I would label it as a link impact. And then the second card says like 300 million people die every year from not being able to afford drugs. Right? That's pretty clear to me that it's an impact. So I'm gonna label it impact. And then finally, it's like 45 million Americans can't afford drugs right now. So that would be the uniqueness, right? Kind of the problem. And there's not always like sometimes uniqueness and impact can kind of seem kind of similar, because like if uniqueness is stating the problem and the impact is also like a result of the problem, sometimes they seem kind of similar, but there's also some instances where it's really clear that it's uniqueness because it talks about like why only your side solves. So what we're gonna do next is I have this. So y'all don't know this topic. It's talking about like Medicare for all and like insurance and stuff, but that doesn't really matter because the point of this drill is for you to identify what is uniqueness, link, and impact, even if you don't like know what the resolution is or understand like insurance, right? You just have to look at the evidence and you have to say, is this a link or an impact? So let me do a random one. So let's just scroll to here, right? Squo, employer insurance decreases employment. It's easier to pay overtime than a new worker. So if I read this, EBHI, costs vary with the level of employment rather than hours worked, leading firms to hire fewer workers. Literature supports such a trade-off. Rising costs accounted for a significant increase in hours worked and a large decline in employment. Firms reduce demand for the number of workers. If firms could reduce the costs associated with employment, demand for workers would increase. So what I'm seeing here is I think this is more link evidence. Because if we think about it, what it's saying here is that because there is like a high health insurance cost with hiring more workers, because a lot of companies have to like pay workers when they hire them, they have to like give them free and health insurance. It's like a benefit that comes with your job. That's pretty expensive, so that's why a lot of companies don't want to hire as many people, because the more people you hire, obviously the more health insurance you have to pay for. But this link evidence kind of says that if they reduced healthcare costs, then demand for workers would increase, right? And then I'm guessing that the impact would be something like creating new jobs. So that's all y'all have to do. So it's kind of like, oh, let's say consumer spending is key to the economy. Maybe that looks like a link to you. You would put link or you'd put uniqueness. So all you have to do is put it in caps like this in front of the tagline. So does anyone have any questions about like this drill? Okay. Well, let me know if y'all need help at any time, but I'm pasting this link in the chat and it's view only, so y'all have to make your own copy of it. So it's gonna be like if I'm using this link, it's like share only, it's view only. So I'm going to go to file, download, and then like Microsoft Word or whatever.
Wait, what's the resolution thing?
The resolution doesn't really matter in this one, but the resolution for this one was the US should implement Medicare for all, which is just like free healthcare for everyone. But like obviously this doesn't really make a lot of sense when you're thinking about like that. So it doesn't really matter what the topic is, it just matters what you think. Like, is this a link, impact, or uniqueness? So all y'all are going to do is download it in Microsoft Word and then put the uniqueness, link, or impact in front of each card. If you're unsure, feel free to like guess, and then we're going to go over this afterwards. So I'm gonna give y'all. Ooh, we're kind of close on time. I'm gonna give y'all 15 minutes, and then that will give me like 3 minutes to go over everything. So, just take 15 minutes to try and go through the cards. So that's like one per evidence, right? And you really only need to like read the highlighted or bolded parts. But other than that, yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So, go ahead and use the link in the chat, make your own copy, and then label the cards.
Okay, I think I mostly got it. Nicole? Is anyone there?
I'm here.
All right, y'all. Hopefully, is anyone not done with it yet? Oh, hi, William. Sorry, I was in the bathroom, so I didn't notice that you came in. But, we were just working on a casing drill, which is basically labeling different cards, whether they're uniqueness, link, or impact. And you can definitely I'm uploading this video later, so you can definitely go ahead and watch it on YouTube after I upload it. I'll paste the link in here. But Juliana, can you give me access to your it told me to request access, so make sure your link sharing is like anyone with the link can access it. Juliana, can you hear me?
It's in the chat now.
Okay. So let's look at what you put down. So linked consumer spending is key to the economy. I totally agree with this one. You know, if they're arguing something like we can increase consumer spending by decreasing healthcare costs, that would make the economy better. Definitely a link there. Public debt will decimate growth and leadership, increase vulnerability to future crisis, and end dollar hegemony. Prioritize slow crises over because. Oh, what's happening? Yeah, I definitely think this can be uniqueness. It's kind of like, you know, the problem is so bad right now, that's why we need to act right now. So it's kind of talking about the problem of the public debt crisis, and you know, you can use that to relate to other things. I definitely think that it can also be an impact. You know, it is uniqueness, obviously, but it can also be an impact. As we said, uniqueness and impact kind of are similar. Because, you know, the public debt crisis decimating economic growth is definitely an impact.
I was going to say impact and uniqueness, but then on the bottom it says like how it's like a slow crisis, and how like right now, and how like slow like crisis or something like that is like bad because people end up like just pushing it aside. So that's why I said.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say this definitely is more uniqueness than impact. But if you like cut the card in a different way, like for only, you know, one of the paragraphs, I would definitely say that it could also be an impact card. Right, next, US competitiveness is in a downward spiral. Every single meaningful demonstrates a declining in overall economic growth. Right, yeah, this is definitely uniqueness. It's saying the problem is right now, the US is in an economic downturn. Squo. Employer insurance decreases employment. Yeah, so we did that one together. Medicaid increases occupational mobility. Decreasing benefits makes it worse. So increases in eligibility, increased movements towards jobs that are better, and this means higher median wages. The reversal in generosity not only decreased mobility, but also decreased transitions towards better jobs. So yeah, I definitely agree that this is a link because it's talking about the connection between arguments, right? The connection between how having more free healthcare or having better healthcare can let you switch jobs. Job mobility to a healthy labor market, right? A key element for the healthy labor market is ability for people to work across occupations. And this is definitely also a link because we don't have an impact yet. It just says like, oh, people can change jobs, right? And so that's definitely a link as compared to an impact. Public health care spending is ballooning US debt now. Single payer is key to balance the budget. Yes, so this is once again definitely a link. So Juliana hitting all the right spots. You know, because when we were looking at this, like it basically says Medicare is the ideal healthcare system to like decrease waste. And that's definitely a link to an impact. Private debt drags economic growth. Yes, that's definitely an impact. Like, you can kind of look at the tags and you can kind of tell what kind of card it is, but private debt is bad for economic growth, and obviously there's going to be a link before this, which is like we can decrease private debt through XYZ. US competitive is declining now because of weak productivity. Yes, that's also uniqueness, because obviously it's saying like there's a problem with the US competitiveness now. All right, so yeah, Juliana, you did a great job. So that's that. So for next week, what I do want y'all to do is take this, and now you've already labeled it uniqueness, link, and impact. And what I want y'all to do is to create a case out of it. So basically, like, you can paraphrase the cards. Obviously, you do not have to read the cards. Like, they're like really long and convoluted. So let me give you an example of mine. So I actually did this same drill. So this one. Sorry, let me find it. This was like when I was in camp. Okay, so for example, we saw a bunch of debt cards there, so I wrote one about public debt. So I obviously paraphrased the cards because I think some of the cards are like really long, and also you don't have to use like everything the card says, right? Because like some of these cards are like, like this card is like 30 paragraphs long, and there's no reason why you have to use all of it. You can just use like one sentence, like, the need to finance debt will be a larger part of our budget. You can do anything you want with the cards, but what we are going to do is we're going to turn it into a case with the uniqueness, the link, and then the impact. Does anyone have any questions? And you don't have to use all of the cards. I'm just asking for you to use some of the cards to make one contention.
Wait, so is this the homework, or is the other thing the homework?
This is the homework, but also cutting cards for your own contentions that you already wrote is the other homework. And obviously, of course, if I asked y'all to write one contention on F and one contention on neg, and if you still haven't written one contention on either side, that's also going to be part of your homework. But yeah, does anyone have any other questions?
Wait, so can you just repeat like what we have for homework in case I missed something?
Yeah. Here, I'll put it in the PowerPoint, but I'll also I'm gonna upload this PowerPoint later, but I'll say it again. So if you haven't done it yet, because I already assigned this before, right? One contention on F and neg for the controls topic. And then the second thing is to cut all the cards you used for your cases. And then the third is take the cards that we used in the labeling drill to create your own contention. So just one. You don't have to use all the cards, and you don't have to use all the parts of the cards. You could just do like healthcare would increase consumer spending, which is good for the economy. So any questions?
None.
All right. Well then, that's it for today. So I will see y'all next time, and have a great week, y'all.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.